The next few days were a blur for Lucas Hale. What started as a mysterious encounter in the woods had quickly turned into a whirlwind of questions, confusion, and an undeniable curiosity about the strange woman named Zara. She had settled into his house with an air of quiet grace, trying her best to adapt to Earth's way of life, yet always carrying an aura of otherworldliness. Her appearance alone was enough to make Lucas pause. Her tall, slender form moved with a fluid elegance, and her skin, soft and silvery in tone, seemed to shimmer faintly under the light. But it wasn't just her looks that caught his attention. It was her eyes. Zara's eyes were a mesmerizing shade of violet, unlike anything he had ever seen before, and they always seemed to gleam with a knowledge of the universe that Lucas couldn't quite fathom. Zara was careful not to impose, though Lucas could tell she was out of her element. She asked him questions about everything: Earth's food, the customs, even the simplest human gestures. The way she furrowed her brow when she tried to understand certain things, like the concept of sarcasm or the idea of television, only made her seem more endearing. Lucas found himself enjoying their conversations, though at times he felt slightly uncomfortable with how easily she seemed to absorb new information. It was as if she had the mind of a scholar, quick to learn, but with an innocence about her that made him want to protect her. One evening, as the two sat down for a simple dinner, Zara studied the food before her with intense focus. Lucas had made spaghetti, a dish he thought she might like, but her eyes were fixed on the plate, her expression puzzled. "This food," she began, her voice soft. "It's strange. I've never eaten anything like it, but it smells comforting." Lucas smiled, watching her attempt to twirl the spaghetti on her fork, clearly unsure of the proper way to eat it. He reached over and gently showed her, his fingers brushing hers in the process. Zara looked at him with a faint blush coloring her cheeks, and for a brief moment their eyes met. There was a quiet, unspoken connection between them, and Lucas felt it in his chest, a warmth that he hadn't realized he needed. As the days passed, Zara's presence became more familiar to him. Her gentle laughter filled the spaces of his house, and her endless questions about Earth made Lucas see his world in a new light. But the strangeness of the situation still weighed on his mind. He knew she was not human, that she wasn't from his planet, yet he couldn't bring himself to treat her like an alien. Zara, in her own way, seemed more human than some people he'd met in his life. Kind, curious, and unafraid to show vulnerability. One night, as they sat together on the couch, Zara asked him a question that caught him off guard. "Do you ever feel lonely, Lucas?" Her eyes, filled with an unexpected sadness, searched his face as she spoke. Lucas hesitated. He had never been good at talking about his feelings, but there was something about her, something honest and raw, that made him open up. "Sometimes," he admitted quietly, "I think we all do. Even when we're surrounded by people, there's a part of us that craves real connection. But it's hard to find, you know." Zara nodded slowly, her gaze drifting down to her hands. "I understand," she murmured, her voice tinged with a soft sorrow that made Lucas's heart ache. There was more to her than just the alien visitor in his home. She was, in her own way, just as lonely as he was. On a quiet evening in his secluded countryside home, Lucas Hale sat in his small study, the soft hum of his computer the only sound breaking the silence. He had moved to this remote town months ago, seeking peace away from the chaos of city life. A man in his late 20s, Lucas preferred the solitude. His days were spent working from home, his nights in the company of books and the occasional video game. But despite the tranquility, there was always an empty space in his life, a sense of longing he couldn't shake. He missed connection, someone to share his thoughts, his victories, his quiet moments. That night, however, was different. The silence was broken by an unfamiliar, pulsing light that shone through his window. It flickered with an almost hypnotic rhythm, causing Lucas to furrow his brow. He wasn't one to jump to conclusions, but his curiosity soon outweighed any sense of caution. He stood, stretching his stiff muscles from hours of sitting, and walked toward the window. The light was not from any known source. It wasn't the neighbor's porch light, nor a passing vehicle. It came from something far more unusual, something alien. As Lucas opened the door to step outside, the cold night air hit him. The light seemed to be coming from the edge of his property, near the woods. His heart raced as he moved toward the glow. The closer he got, the more surreal the situation became. There, standing among the trees, was a figure. No, a woman, unlike any he had ever seen. She was tall, with delicate, almost ethereal features, and her skin shimmered in the light, not like any earthling he knew. She wore a strange metallic suit that glinted as if reflecting the stars above. The woman's eyes were wide with confusion, their color an unusual shade of violet that almost glowed in the dark. Lucas stopped in his tracks, unsure if what he was seeing was real. His mind raced. Was she some kind of lost traveler? A dream? He hesitated, unsure of what to do, but as if sensing his presence, the woman turned toward him, her eyes locking with his. "Please, help me," she said, her voice soft and melodic, but filled with a quiet urgency. Lucas's mind struggled to process what was happening. The words she spoke were in perfect English, yet they felt foreign in his ears. He had always dreamed of encountering something extraordinary, but he never imagined it would happen like this. Still, his instincts took over. He nodded and approached, his heart pounding in his chest. "You're lost?" he asked, his voice shaky, as his curiosity and concern battled for dominance. The woman, her expression one of both relief and exhaustion, nodded. "I need shelter. My ship, it malfunctioned. I need help to repair it." Lucas, despite the strangeness of the situation, felt an overwhelming sense of compassion. She looked vulnerable, far from any threat. Without thinking, he extended a hand toward her, offering help. "Come with me. I'll try to help you." As they walked back to his house, Lucas couldn't shake the feeling that his life was about to change forever. A few days after their heartfelt conversation, Lucas Hale found himself facing a new dilemma. As much as he enjoyed Zara's company, he began to feel the weight of the decision he was about to make. Zara had settled into his home as if it were her own, and though he'd agreed to help her repair her ship, the days were stretching on. Lucas had no idea how long it would take for a rescue mission to arrive, or if there even was one. Yet, Zara's presence, so calming and kind, made him forget the urgency of time. One morning, as Lucas was having his usual cup of coffee in the kitchen, he noticed Zara standing by the window, staring out into the distance. Her expression was distant, almost as if she were lost in thought. Lucas couldn't help but wonder what was going on in her mind. She had been so open about her loneliness, yet there were moments when she seemed distant, closed off. "Hey, Zara," Lucas called softly, not wanting to startle her. "Everything all right?" She turned to face him, her violet eyes locking with his. There was a flicker of sadness there, one that Lucas couldn't ignore. She looked away quickly, as if trying to push it down. I am fine. Lucas, thank you for everything," she said, her voice filled with gratitude. Lucas, however, could tell something was off. He had learned to read her well enough in the time they had spent together. There was more to her than what she was letting on. She wasn't just a stranger from another world. She was someone in need, just like he was. But what was she hiding? "I've been thinking," Zara continued, her voice more hesitant this time, "about staying here with you." Lucas blinked in surprise. "Staying here? You mean for a while longer?" His mind raced. He hadn't expected her to bring it up so suddenly. Was she really planning to stay for good? Zara nodded slowly, her fingers tracing the edge of the counter. "I know this is unusual," she said, her voice softer than usual. "But I feel a connection to you, Lucas. I've never had a place to truly belong. On my planet, I was always an outsider. And now, I find comfort here, with you." Lucas felt a knot tighten in his chest. Her words hit him harder than he expected. He didn't know if it was because of the vulnerability in her voice or the truth that resonated with him. He understood her loneliness more than he cared to admit, but the thought of sharing his life with an alien, someone who might leave at any moment, was daunting. Yet, he couldn't deny the pull he felt toward her. "I'm not sure what's going to happen, Ziara," Lucas said, his voice gentle. "But if you really want to stay, then maybe we can figure this out together." Ziara smiled, a soft, genuine smile that made her eyes brighten. "Thank you, Lucas. I promise I won't be a burden." Her words, though simple, carried a weight that made Lucas's heart skip. He wasn't sure what this decision would mean for both of them, but in that moment, it felt right. The silence that followed wasn't awkward, but filled with the unspoken understanding that things were about to change between them. Neither of them knew exactly what the future held, but for the first time, Lucas felt hopeful about it. In the days that followed, Lucas Hale and Ziara settled into a new unspoken rhythm. Ziara had officially decided to stay with him. And while Lucas initially felt uncertain about what it would mean, he quickly realized that her presence was far from a burden. In fact, it was becoming something more, something he wasn't quite ready to label, but couldn't deny. They spent more time together, learning from each other, sharing stories, and finding comfort in their unlikely companionship. Ziara's ability to adapt to Earth life was impressive. She learned quickly, picking up on things like cooking and basic household chores with surprising ease. The first time she prepared a meal for Lucas, it was a simple dish, something she called Stellarin stew, which, though different, was surprisingly delicious. Ziara explained that the flavors came from her home planet, where the ingredients were nothing like what Earth offered. But Lucas didn't care about the difference in taste. What struck him most was the care she put into the meal. She seemed to have a way of making even the simplest tasks feel meaningful. There was an elegance in the way she moved, a quiet confidence that made Lucas appreciate her company more than he had expected. They often sat together in the evenings, talking about everything and nothing at all, the silence between them never feeling uncomfortable. It was as though they had found a peaceful understanding without needing words. One evening, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset, Lucas found himself lost in thought. Ziara had been more open lately, sharing bits and pieces of her past, the loneliness she had endured traveling across the galaxy, the distant memories of a family she no longer saw, and the pain of being away from her people. It was clear that her journey had not been easy, and Lucas couldn't help but feel sympathy for her. She had never asked for this, never wanted to be stranded on Earth, alone. But despite the hardships, there was a strength in Ziara that Lucas admired. She had a quiet resilience that spoke volumes, and it reminded him of his own struggles. The more time they spent together, the more Lucas realized that their shared loneliness was the thread that connected them. "You know," Ziara said, breaking the comfortable silence, "I never thought I'd find a place where I belonged. I thought I was meant to roam the universe alone." Lucas turned to face her, his eyes softening as he listened. "I think we all feel like that sometimes," he replied. "Like we're meant to be somewhere else with someone else. But maybe it's not about finding a place. Maybe it's about finding the right people." Ziara smiled at him, a smile that reached her eyes, making them shine like stars. "Maybe you're right, Lucas." She paused for a moment, her gaze turning back to the setting sun. "I think I've found that with you." Lucas's heart skipped a beat at her words. He wasn't sure what he had expected from this unexpected encounter, but it certainly wasn't this. He wasn't sure where it was all heading, but for the first time in a long while, he felt a sense of hope. There was something undeniable between them, something deeper than simple friendship or duty. He wasn't sure if it was love, but it was something worth exploring. The world outside was quiet, the air cooled as the stars began to appear in the sky. Neither of them spoke, but the connection between them had grown in ways neither could have predicted. For Lucas, this new chapter in his life had only just begun, and he wasn't sure where it would take him. But for the first time, he wasn't afraid to find out. As the days turned into weeks, Lucas Hale couldn't help but notice a shift in the atmosphere around him. What started as an unexpected act of kindness had slowly transformed into something far more complex. Ziara had become more than just a guest in his home. She was becoming a constant presence, one that Lucas wasn't sure how to define. He had always been content with solitude, but now, every room seemed to feel a little fuller when she was around. It wasn't that he minded, quite the opposite. There was something comforting about the way Ziara moved through his life, with her quiet grace and deep curiosity about everything she encountered. But beneath that calm exterior, there were moments when Lucas saw something else in her eyes, something fleeting, almost hidden behind the calm veneer. It started one evening when Ziara was sitting on the couch, staring out the window, her mind clearly somewhere far away. Lucas had been busy with his work but couldn't shake the feeling that something was bothering her. She had been quieter than usual the past few days, and he could tell she was holding something back. He had learned that Ziara wasn't one to talk about her feelings openly, but the longer they spent together, the more he realized that she had her own internal struggles. Ziara. Lucas called gently, setting down his laptop and walking over to her. "You've been quiet today. Is everything okay?" She turned her head toward him, her violet eyes glimmering with an emotion Lucas couldn't quite place. I've been thinking," she began, her voice soft but weighted with uncertainty. "I feel like I've overstayed my welcome." Lucas blinked, caught off guard. "What do you mean? You're not a burden, Ziara. I told you, if you need to stay, I want to help." Ziara's gaze shifted to the floor, her fingers nervously picking at the hem of her sleeve. "It's not that," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "It's just, I don't belong here, Lucas. I don't belong on Earth. I was sent here on a mission, not to make friends, not to build relationships. And yet, I find myself." Her words trailed off, her shoulders slumping as she seemed to shrink inwardly. Lucas sat down next to her, the weight of her words settling in the air between them. He had never seen Ziara so vulnerable, so torn. He reached out instinctively, placing a hand on her shoulder. "Ziara," he said softly, "you're not just a mission to me. You're a person, and you've made this place feel more alive than it has in a long time. You don't have to leave. You're welcome here, no matter what." She looked at him, her eyes searching his face for any trace of insincerity. But there was none. Lucas was telling the truth. He meant every word. She had given him more than just companionship. She had filled a void he hadn't known was there. In her quiet way, she had brought a warmth to his life he hadn't realized he was missing. "I don't want to lose this," Ziara said softly, almost to herself, her voice filled with a longing Lucas couldn't ignore. "You don't have to," Lucas replied, his voice steady and sure. "We'll figure this out together." In that moment, Lucas realized something important. Despite the fact that they came from entirely different worlds, there was something real between them. It was more than just an act of kindness, more than a simple exchange. It was the beginning of a connection, one that neither of them had expected, but both of them needed. Ziara finally smiled, a small, hopeful smile that warmed Lucas's heart. He wasn't sure what the future would hold, or how long they would have together. But for the first time in a long while, he wasn't afraid to find out. Together, they would face whatever came next. As the weeks passed, Lucas Hale and Ziara settled into a quiet harmony, though beneath the surface, the complexity of their growing bond was starting to unsettle both of them. They had become comfortable with each other, but there was still an unspoken tension hanging between them, a kind of uncertainty that neither of them knew how to address. Ziara had stopped hiding her feelings, but at the same time, she didn't want to burden Lucas with the weight of her past. She often found herself retreating into her thoughts, staring out of the window at the stars, as though searching for something just beyond reach. One afternoon, as Lucas was cleaning up after lunch, Ziara approached him with a look he had come to recognize. It was a mixture of hesitation and determination, as if she had made up her mind about something. He paused, wiping his hands on a towel as she stepped closer. "Lucas," she began, her voice soft but steady, "there's something I need to tell you." He set the towel down, giving her his full attention. The look in her eyes made him feel a chill run through him, but he kept his expression neutral, trying not to let his concern show. "What is it?" he asked gently. Ziara took a deep breath, clearly choosing her words carefully. "I haven't been completely honest with you," she said, her gaze lowering to the floor. "When I first arrived, I told you I was stranded here because of a malfunction. But the truth is, I was sent here by my people, Lucas, not just to observe your planet, but to find a companion, someone to bond with." Lucas blinked in surprise. He had suspected there was more to Ziara's arrival than she had let on, but hearing it from her own lips was different. He tried to keep his emotions in check, but inside, he felt a swirl of confusion and a hint of betrayal. "A companion," he repeated, his voice barely above a whisper. "What do you mean by that?" Ziara looked up, her violet eyes locking with his. "My people are different, Lucas. We live long lives, but we are solitary by nature. We have partners, but it's not the same as human relationships. It's a connection, a bond, something that ties us together. And I was sent to Earth to find that." Lucas swallowed hard, trying to process the information. "So you came here looking for a partner, for someone to bond with." He felt his heart sink at the thought, unsure of how to feel. Had he been nothing more than a target for her mission all along? "I didn't know it would be like this," Ziara continued, her voice trembling slightly. "I didn't expect to feel this way, Lucas. I didn't expect to care about someone the way I care about you. When I arrived, it was just a task, a mission. But now, I'm not sure what's real anymore." Lucas could see the pain in her eyes, the vulnerability she had rarely shown before. She was not the calculating alien he had imagined. She was someone who had gotten caught up in her own emotions, someone who had lost herself in the bond they had formed. Taking a deep breath, Lucas stepped closer to her. "Ziara," he said quietly, "it's okay. You don't have to hide anything from me. I don't know what this is, what we're becoming, but I think we both have something to figure out." Ziara's eyes softened, and for a moment, she looked almost relieved. You don't hate me?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "No," Lucas replied with a small smile. "I don't hate you. I never did." And just like that, the tension between them seemed to lift, if only for a moment. But the truth had been laid out between them, and it was clear that their relationship, whatever it was no longer simple. It had grown into something deeper, something more complicated. But they were both ready to face it together. As Lucas Hale sat across from Ziara, he couldn't help but feel a strange mix of emotions. The weight of the truth she had just shared with him lingered in the air between them. Ziara had come to Earth, not by accident, but on a mission to find a partner, someone with whom she could form a deep, lifelong bond. And yet, somewhere along the way, her mission had shifted into something else entirely. She had never expected to feel this kind of connection, this bond with Lucas. And now, the lines between duty and desire were blurred, leaving both of them unsure of where they stood. The silence in the room was thick, as both of them sat in contemplation, the gravity of Ziara's confession settling in their minds. Ziara's gaze was distant, her fingers fidgeting nervously with the hem of her sleeve. She had shared her truth, but she wasn't sure how Lucas would take it. She had seen the flicker of surprise in his eyes when she revealed her real purpose on Earth, and that was enough to make her question everything. Lucas, on the other hand, was trying to process what he had just heard. He had never expected his life to take this kind of turn. A few weeks ago, his biggest concern was finding peace and quiet in his secluded home. But now, he found himself caught in the middle of a situation he hadn't asked for. Yet, he couldn't deny the pull he felt toward Ziara. The connection between them had grown so strong in such a short amount of time that he couldn't imagine his life without her, despite the strange circumstances. "I didn't mean to complicate things," Zara finally spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. "I came here looking for a partner, but I never expected it to feel like this. I never expected you." Lucas looked at her, his heart softening. He could see the conflict in her eyes, the same uncertainty he felt. "Zara," he began, his voice steady, "I'm not sure what this is, but I don't think it's just a mission anymore. For either of us." He paused, trying to find the right words. "I don't know what kind of future we can have. I don't know if we'll ever understand everything about each other. But I do know one thing. I want to figure it out. With you." Zara's eyes brightened slightly at his words, though doubt still lingered in her expression. She had spent so much of her life alone, never truly connecting with anyone, and now she was facing something far more complicated than she could have ever imagined. But Lucas was different. He had become more than just someone she was supposed to bond with. He had become someone she cared about deeply, in a way that felt as real as anything she had ever known. The tension that had hung between them started to dissolve, but there was still a quiet fear in Zara's heart. What if their connection wasn't enough? What if they couldn't overcome the vast differences between them? What if she was just another alien passing through his life? But Lucas seemed to sense her uncertainty, and without saying a word, he reached across the table and gently placed his hand on hers. It wasn't a grand gesture, but it spoke volumes. It said, "I'm here. We'll figure this out together." Zara looked at him, the uncertainty slowly melting away. For the first time since arriving on Earth, she felt a sense of peace. Whatever the future held, she knew she wasn't alone. And that, for now, was enough. The days following their heartfelt conversation were quieter, yet filled with a newfound understanding between Lucas Hale and Zara. The tension that had once clouded their interactions had lifted, leaving behind something deeper, something that neither of them had anticipated. The weight of Zara's mission was still there, lingering in the back of her mind, but for the first time since arriving on Earth, she allowed herself to embrace the connection she had formed with Lucas. She no longer saw herself as just a visitor on a mission. She was part of something, part of a world that was so different from her own, and she wasn't alone. As for Lucas, he had been grappling with the same uncertainty. He had opened his home and his heart to Zara, and now, with each passing day, he found it harder to imagine life without her. Despite the strangeness of the situation, something about Zara's presence made his world feel more complete. They had shared quiet meals, watched sunsets together, and spent countless hours talking, learning about each other's lives, worlds, and dreams. He realized that his initial hesitations about helping her had been based on fear, the fear of change, of loss. But now he found that his fear had faded, replaced by something more powerful. He wasn't afraid anymore. He was ready to face whatever came next. One evening, as they sat on the porch, the sun dipping below the horizon, Zara finally brought up the one thing that had been on her mind since the day she had arrived. "Lucas," she said, her voice gentle but filled with resolve, "I need to tell you something important." Lucas turned to face her, his brow furrowing slightly. "What is it?" he asked, his tone filled with curiosity. Zara took a deep breath, her violet eyes reflecting the fading light of the day. "My people, they're coming for me. They're going to try to bring me back." Lucas's heart skipped a beat. "What do you mean?" he asked, his voice tight with worry. "When? How do you know?" Zara's gaze never wavered as she looked at him. "I've been receiving signals. I knew this day would come eventually, but I didn't expect it to be so soon. I didn't want to tell you because I didn't want to cause you any more pain, but I can't keep it from you any longer. They're coming, Lucas." Lucas sat back in his chair, the weight of her words sinking in. For a moment, he didn't know how to react. His first instinct was to tell her to stay, to ask her to refuse to go back, to try to find a way to make this work. But he knew Zara wasn't just anyone. She had her duty, her purpose, and he couldn't ask her to abandon that. "I don't want you to leave," Lucas admitted, his voice low. "But I understand. This is your life. I knew when I brought you in that things could change. I just didn't think it would happen so soon." Ziara reached out, her hand gently touching his. "Lucas, I care about you more than I can say. I never expected to find something like this, someone like you, and I will never forget it. No matter where I go or what happens, you'll always have a place in my heart." Lucas looked at her, his heart heavy but full of understanding. He knew what they had was special, something that transcended time and distance. They didn't know what the future held, but for now, they had this, each other, in this moment. And that was enough. The sound of the distant stars filled the quiet space between them as they sat together, both uncertain of what the next day would bring, but knowing that for now, they had each other. And sometimes, that was all they needed. The days that followed Ziara's revelation were filled with a quiet anticipation, as both Lucas Hale and Ziara navigated the uncertain future that lay ahead. Ziara had told him that her people were coming for her. And although Lucas knew that it was inevitable, the thought of losing her left him unsettled. He couldn't help but wonder how he would cope with the emptiness once she was gone. Yet, in the midst of his growing fear, he couldn't bring himself to let it overshadow the bond they had formed. No matter what, he had to cherish these moments, even if they were fleeting. As the days passed, Lucas tried to maintain a sense of normalcy. He went about his daily routine, but it was hard to ignore the quiet tension that lingered in the air. Ziara, on the other hand, was strangely calm. She didn't act as though she was leaving tomorrow, or the next day, or even in the next few weeks. She carried herself with the same gentle grace, though Lucas could see a flicker of sadness in her eyes whenever she thought no one was watching. It was as though she was preparing herself for something she had no control over, something that had been set in motion long before she had ever met Lucas. One evening, as they sat in the living room, Lucas noticed Ziara's gaze drifting once again to the window, her eyes fixed on the stars. He had come to realize that whenever she looked at the sky, she seemed to be searching for something, a connection to the world she had left behind. It was a part of her that Lucas couldn't fully understand, but it made him ache to know that, in some ways, she would never truly be his. "Ziara," Lucas said softly, breaking the silence. "I know you have to go, but can we talk about it? I don't want to just sit here and wait for it to happen." Ziara turned to him, her eyes filled with both gratitude and sorrow. "I didn't want to burden you with the details, Lucas, but I understand. You deserve to know what's going to happen." She paused for a moment, as if gathering the strength to say the words she had been avoiding. "My people, they won't understand. I'm not supposed to have attachments to other species. It's forbidden, Lucas. They'll want to take me back, and if I resist, there could be consequences. I don't want to put you in danger, but I also don't want to leave." Lucas's heart clenched at the words. He had known that there were complications, but hearing it from her made it all the more real. He reached out and took her hand, his grip firm but gentle. "You don't have to leave, Ziara. I don't care about their rules. If they come for you, we'll figure something out. We'll face it together." Ziara shook her head softly, a tear slipping down her cheek. "You don't understand, Lucas. It's not that simple. I'm not just some human who can fight for their love. I'm from another world. I don't belong here, and no matter how much I care about you, I know that." Lucas's voice was filled with quiet determination. "You do belong here, Ziara, with me, and I don't care about the distance, or the rules, or anything else. I just care about you." The room was silent for a moment, as Ziara looked into his eyes, searching for something, something that perhaps only she could see. Then, finally, she nodded, as if making a decision. Maybe we can figure this out. Maybe I don't have to leave just yet." Lucas smiled, a sense of relief washing over him. The future was still uncertain, but for now, they had this moment together. And for him, that was enough. No matter what happened next, Lucas knew one thing. He wasn't going to let her go without a fight.